we get much higher. So high.
No, 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 no. Not that dark fantasy. No. Dark fantasy, where horror meets high adventure and the line between hero and monsters blur. From eldritch horrors to doomed anti-heroes, this genre has left its mark on literature, films, games, and pop culture. But where did it all begin? And why do we find ourselves so drawn to these dark and twisted worlds? Today, we uncover the unbridled history of dark fantasy. Awaken, tarnished. Those words spoken to you after you create your character in what is probably one of the greatest video games ever created. Set in the lands between, you become a playable character on a quest to repair the Elden Ring and become the new Elden Lord. Elden Ring, developed by From Software, directed by Hidetaka Miyazaki, with world building provided by American fantasy writer George R.R. Martin. The game was published for the PlayStation 4, 5, Windows, Xbox One, and Xbox Series X and S on February 25th, 2022 in Japan, and internationally by Bandai Namco. It's presented through a third-person perspective, where the player can freely roam its open world. 6 main areas can be traversed using the player character's steed, Torrent. Linear, hidden dungeons can be explored to find useful items, and players can use several types of weapons and magic spells, including non-direct engagement enabled by stealth mechanics. To understand dark fantasy, we have to look at the seeds planted in the Gothic horror of the 18th and 19th century. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Bram Stoker's Dracula, and Edgar Allan Poe's macabre tales that gave us monsters that weren't just external threats. They were the mirrors of human fears and moral corruption. Then came the weird fiction movement, led by none other than H.P. Lovecraft, whose cosmic horror blurred the line between fantasy and existential terror. And let's not forget Robert E. Howard, whose Conan the Barbarian stories balanced sword and sorcery with grim, brutal themes, creating a foundation for what would later be known as dark fantasy. Now, by the mid-20th century, dark fantasy truly began to take shape. Michael Moorcock introduced us to Elric of Melanibon, a doomed sorcerer knight wielding a soul-drinking blade, an anti-hero in every sense of the word. Then came the Dark Tower series by Stephen King, blending horror, western, and fantasy into truly something entirely unique. Meanwhile, we've got Clive Barker's Hellraiser and Books of Blood, showing us just how grotesque and visceral dark fantasy could get, with nightmarish creatures and deeply disturbing narratives that stuck with you long after the final page. Now, let's fast forward to the end of the 20th century into the start of the 21st century. Dark fantasy is more alive than ever. Kentaro Miura's Berserk redefined the genre in manga, delivering to us a tale of revenge, fate, and unspeakable horror that has inspired countless stories since then. Game of Thrones introduced mainstream audiences to a world where no character was safe, proving that fantasy didn't have to be about noble heroes and happy endings. And then there's The Witcher, a world steeped in folklore and moral ambiguity, where monsters aren't always the ones with claws and fangs. But why does dark fantasy endure? Maybe it's because it offers us a reflection of reality, of struggle, loss, and the eternal battle between light and darkness. Unlike traditional fantasy, where good and evil are clearly defined, dark fantasy revels in the gray, forcing us to question morality and the true cost of power. In a world that often feels uncertain, these stories remind us that even in darkness, there's something worth fighting for. So dark fantasy is more than just knights fighting demons. It's a reflection of our fears, our struggles, and the depths of the human soul. What's your favorite dark fantasy story? It could be a book, movie, game, or anime, but let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this little dive into the shadows, be sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more Unbridled history. I'll see you in the next video. I'm Oz, and this has been the Unbridled History of